Hi, my name's Alaris, and 3 years ago, my parents left me sobbing in a hospital hallway. 6 months pregnant, 18 years old, with nothing but a crumpled $100 bill and a thin coat to my name. "You're the shame of this family," my father said, before walking away, with my sister's hand in his. They erased me like I never existed. But here's the part they never saw coming. The man who picked me up that night wasn't a social worker. He was a mafia boss. And he didn't offer me pity. He offered me power. So tell me, what would you do if the people who ruined your life invited you back, not knowing you'd return in a limousine? Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this, and where from? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know who's walking through this storm with me. The smell of disinfectant clung to the air, sharp and sterile, cutting through the faint perfume my mother always wore, jasmine and money. I remember the way the fluorescent lights flickered, casting pale stripes across the floor like prison bars. I stood barefoot in the hospital hallway, my hands pressed against my swollen belly, trying to steady my breath. 18 and already unwanted. My mother stood a few feet away, her coat buttoned up to her throat as if the sight of me might stain her. Her voice came out hard, clipped, as though she were spitting out a word she couldn't stand to say. "You've brought disgrace to this family." I tried to speak, to explain that it wasn't supposed to happen this way, that I hadn't planned any of it, but my throat locked up. My father stood beside her, staring at the wall behind me, as if the tiles were suddenly fascinating. He didn't look at me once. He didn't need to. His silence was a verdict. Then, as if reading from some unspoken script, my mother opened her handbag, pulled out a $100 bill, crumpled and wrinkled, and a thin beige coat I didn't recognize. "Take this," she said flatly. "You'll need it more than we do." Celia, my younger sister, stood just behind them. Her mascara was already running. She kept her eyes down, clutching her mother's purse strap like it was a lifeline. I lifted my hand, just a small motion, a desperate gesture, but no one moved. No one reached back. Instead, my mother turned, grabbed Celia's hand, and walked away. Their heels clicked together down the corridor, echoing like gunshots. My father followed, slow and deliberate. They never looked back. For a moment, I stood frozen, my hands still in the air, suspended in that small space where hope dies. The nurse at the desk avoided my eyes. Even the hallway seemed to recoil, as if the building itself had decided I no longer belonged there. When I finally stepped outside, the rain had started again. Thin, bitter drops slicing through the cold night. The beige coat did nothing. It clung to my skin, heavy and useless. I pulled it tighter anyway, pretending it could protect me from something, anything. My hair stuck to my face, and every breath burned. I walked without knowing where I was going, past the ambulance bay, past the flickering streetlight that hummed like it was mocking me. The $100 bill in my pocket felt like a cruel joke. I whispered apologies into the rain, to my baby, to myself, to the version of me that still believed family meant love. I wasn't just homeless, I murmured. I was erased. The streets were empty, except for the sound of distant traffic. My shoes soaked through. Each step was a small surrender. I thought about the years before, the birthday cakes, the family dinners, the laughter that now felt like it had belonged to someone else. Every memory had been rewritten tonight, turned into something bitter. I stopped under the awning of a closed pharmacy, trying to catch my breath. My body ached, and the weight inside me shifted, reminding me I wasn't alone, even if it felt that way. Then I heard it, a car slowing down, tires whispering over wet asphalt. A black sedan, its windows tinted dark. My heart jumped. I took a half step back, ready to run, though I had nowhere to go. The door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit that didn't belong to this part of town. He didn't look threatening, just deliberate. The kind of man who moved as if the world always made room for him. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice calm, low. "It's freezing." I didn't answer. My mind raced through every terrible story I'd ever heard about strangers in the night. He took off his coat, black, expensive, far too warm for someone like me, and draped it over my shoulders before I could protest. "No one deserves to freeze," he said simply. For a second, I almost broke. The kindness in his voice hurt worse than the cold. I didn't trust it. I couldn't. But when I looked up at him, I saw something unexpected. Not pity, not curiosity, just recognition. As if he saw the space I occupied in the world and didn't flinch. My lips trembled when I spoke. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you look like someone who needs a way out," he said. The rain softened to a mist. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, steady, insistent. The hospital loomed behind me, its lights glowing like a reminder of everything I had lost. He glanced at the car, then back at me. "If you want to live, get in." For a moment, I waited for my parents to come running after me, for my sister's voice, for anything that might tell me this wasn't final. The doors stayed closed. No one came. I turned toward the hospital one last time. The windows were dark now, except for a faint reflection. Me, standing there in someone else's coat, holding my belly, a ghost of the girl I used to be. I took a deep breath, opened the car door, and stepped inside. The leather was warm. The world outside blurred as the rain streaked across the glass. As the door shut behind me, I didn't know whether I'd just escaped or walked into something darker. The hum of the engine was the only sound between us, and I realized I didn't even know the man who had just saved me. I sat there, in the warmth of the leather seat, wrapped in his coat that still held the faint scent of sandalwood and something metallic. We didn't speak. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift like he didn't need to move it. Like the car obeyed his presence alone. Everything about him was calm, precise, unreadable. Streetlights streaked past the window like memories I didn't want to chase. I watched them blur, felt the ache of every mile put between me and the hospital, between me and the people who left me without a name or a second glance. I should have felt safe. But safety isn't something that comes with a locked door. It comes with knowing where you stand, and with him, I didn't. The elevator in his building moved too smooth, too quiet. It opened directly into the penthouse. I stepped out slowly, my hand brushing the marble wall like I needed to prove it was real. The place was quiet, not cold, but distant. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a dark skyline sprinkled with city lights. It wasn't home. It was a world I didn't belong to. Marcus didn't give me time to wonder. "No one here gives handouts," he said, stepping out of his shoes like he did it the same way every night. "You'll work, you'll earn your safety." I didn't argue. I didn't ask what the work was. I just nodded, numb. He pointed down a hallway. "First door on the right, it's yours for now." The room was too beautiful for someone like me. Silk sheets, a chair that looked like it belonged in a museum, and a window view that made the stars feel jealous. I stood in the center of it, like a thief caught mid-step. There was a note on the nightstand in neat handwriting. Breakfast. Then choices. I didn't know if I should be comforted or concerned. When morning crept in through the window, I was still awake. Too many thoughts, too many what-ifs. My fingers brushed my stomach, the weight of everything too real. I hadn't even changed clothes. I sat on the edge of the bed, debating if this was better than the street, or just another cage with prettier walls. Breakfast was waiting in the kitchen, scrambled eggs, toast, berries I hadn't tasted since I was a kid. I ate slowly, like someone who expected it to vanish. No one joined me. Marcus showed up just as I was rinsing my plate. He didn't ask about my night. He didn't ask about my baby. He just walked to the counter and poured himself a cup of black coffee like we were co-workers meeting in a break room. "You're under my protection," he said. "Not my control. You decide if you want to stay." It caught me off guard, the idea that I had a say in anything. For years, I followed, obeyed, bent myself into what people needed. This man, who had every reason to expect obedience, was offering something I didn't recognize. He laid it out without drama. I could take some cash and go. 1 week, maybe 2 if I stretched it. Or I could stay, work at one of his community foundations, rebuild something real. I wasn't choosing him, I thought. I was choosing not to disappear. "I'll stay," I told him, my voice steadier than I felt. He didn't smile. He just nodded, like he already knew. Later that afternoon, as I explored the hallway outside my room, I met someone else, Thomas Crane. His suit wasn't as sharp as Marcus's, but his eyes were sharper. He introduced himself with a handshake that lingered too long. "You're safe here," he said, his voice low, eyes flicking to the hallway behind me. "As long as you follow the rules." I caught the edge in his tone. Then he glanced toward a dark wooden door at the far end of the hall, thicker, older than the others. No lock visible, but something about it set off limits louder than any sign could. "What's behind there?" I asked before I could stop myself. Thomas didn't smile. "That's not a question you ask. That's a rule you remember." I nodded, but something about the way he said it stuck with me. Back in my room, the air felt heavier. On the chair near the window, someone had laid out my thin beige coat, clean now, folded perfectly. A small tag was pinned to the sleeve. "Keep it. You'll need it when you leave again." It should have made me feel safe. Instead, it reminded me this wasn't forever. I sat with it for a long time, my fingers running over the fabric that once soaked in hospital rain. It wasn't about warmth, it was about memory, who I had been, who I might still be. That night, as the sky turned gold over the skyline, I stood at the window. My reflection looked different in the glass. Still me, but not just the girl abandoned in the rain. "You survived because you listened," Marcus said from behind me. His voice didn't startle me this time. "Keep doing that." I gave a quiet nod, but my eyes drifted back to that door down the hall. That night, I dreamed of that door, and the sound behind it that no one else seemed to hear. It started as a whisper, a woman's voice behind the forbidden door calling my name. At first, I thought I was still dreaming. The room was dark, the city lights from outside flickering faintly through the curtains. But the sound was too real, soft, almost tender, then suddenly sharp, like a blade hidden in silk. "Alaris!" My breath caught. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years, but my body remembered before my mind did. My mother's voice, or something that sounded too much like it. "You've always been the shame of this family." The words seeped through the wood like smoke, curling into my chest. I sat up, my skin clammy. The clock beside me read 2:47 a.m. I told myself it was just a memory, a cruel echo from somewhere deep in my mind. But the whisper came again, low and scolding, a sound that wrapped itself around me until I had to move. Barefoot, I stepped into the hallway. The marble floor was cold, grounding me in the present even as my mind slid backward in time. The air was still, heavy, as if the entire penthouse was holding its breath. I stopped a few feet from the door, the same one Thomas had warned me about. The brass handle glinted under the faint hallway light. My hand hovered inches away. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to open it or run. "You never learn, Alaris," the whisper said again. I shut my eyes. It wasn't real, I told myself. It couldn't be. But it felt real. Every word carried the same rhythm. the same restrained disgust my mother used to lace into every sentence. When I was a child, I thought that voice could shape me, that if I behaved, stayed quiet, did what I was told, she might love me the way she loved Celia. I used to clean Celia's messes before my mother saw them, take the blame when things broke, just to hear her say something kind. She never did. The hallway blurred for a moment as the memory overlapped the present. My mother's perfume, Celia's tearful eyes, my father's silence. I pressed my palm against the wall just to steady myself. I had traded one set of walls for another, I thought. Only this one was gilded. I didn't open the door, not that night. I turned away, my pulse still hammering, and forced myself back into bed. But the whisper stayed. Even in silence, I could feel it, a presence pressing against the edge of my sanity. By morning, the air felt heavier. I tried to shake it off, focusing on small things, making tea, folding my clothes, pretending that I could build a routine. Marcus was gone, but the staff moved quietly through the house, each person aware of what not to say. Then one morning, the door was open. It must have been the cleaning staff. They were new, unfamiliar with the rules. I should have turned away. I told myself that. But my feet moved on their own. Inside was not what I expected. The room was bright, sterile, and lined with photographs, faces, dozens of them. Some smiling, some not. Men, women, children, strangers, until they weren't. Because near the center of the display, I saw them, my parents. The picture was recent, taken at a charity gala. They looked perfect, happy, draped in pearls and respectability. The small logo on the corner of the banner behind them made my stomach drop. The D'Amato Foundation for Family Renewal. Marcus's foundation. I stared at the image until the edges blurred. My mind replayed every moment since that night at the hospital. His sudden appearance. The way he already knew my name, his measured calm. None of it was coincidence. I thought he found me by chance, I whispered, but he had been watching long before that night. A sound behind me made me flinch. It was only my reflection in the glass frame, pale and shaking. I stepped out of the room quickly and pulled the door shut, my fingers trembling as the latch clicked back into place. That evening, when Marcus returned, I didn't confront him directly. I mentioned the charity instead, casual as I could manage. I saw that your foundation works with families in crisis, I said, stirring sugar into my tea, though I never drank it sweet. He didn't even look up. Everyone deserves a second chance, Alaris, even the ones who hurt you. The words were soft, almost kind, but his tone, it carried a weight I couldn't name. Like a truth folded neatly between lies. That night, as I lay awake, I realized the voice behind the door hadn't been my mother's after all. It was my own. My mind warning me in the only language it knew, the voice of fear I'd learned to obey. You're still someone's pawn. The thought sat heavy in my chest. Later, I pulled out a notebook I found in the desk drawer. My handwriting was shaky, unused, but I started anyway. For years, I mistook silence for safety. But silence is where they hide you. The thin coat was folded beside me, still carrying the faint smell of rain and hospital disinfectant. I thought about burning it, ending the memory once and for all. But I couldn't. Not yet. It wasn't just a coat. It was proof I had survived, even if survival came with chains I couldn't yet see. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and tried to breathe. Just as sleep began to pull me under, my phone buzzed. An unknown number, just 4 words. They know where you are. My eyes darted toward the hallway, and froze. The door, the one that had been closed, locked. It was open again. That was the night I realized safety was never the gift. It was the trap. By the time the light slipped between the blinds, the bed beside mine was still untouched. The hush in the penthouse wasn't peaceful. It was unnerving. Something was off. The kind of silence that doesn't settle but lingers, like smoke in a room where something burned long before you walked in. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and sat up slowly. No music playing, no footsteps, no murmurs of business deals, or Marcus's low, clipped phone voice echoing from the hallway. Only stillness, too still. I walked barefoot across the cold tile to the kitchen, hoping the smell of coffee might greet me. But the pot was empty. The mug he'd used last night sat exactly where he left it, the ring of dark residue inside mocking me. No note, no goodbye, just gone. And the room, the one he had sworn I should never enter, now wide open, hollow, clean, cleared out like no one had ever occupied it. Like it never mattered. Like I hadn't spent nights wondering about the whisper behind that door. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at nothing. My body felt heavier than it had in days. My hands trembled slightly, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was familiarity. It was waking up alone, again. Another man with promises, vanished without explanation. Another protector who wasn't protecting anything but secrets. A buzz jolted me. My phone lit up on the kitchen counter. A message, brief and cold, blinked on the screen. Relocation necessary, keys in drawer, do not contact anyone. There was no sender name, just an address at the bottom. A house outside the city. I didn't even need to open the drawer to know the keys would be there. Of course they were. Of course he had already planned this. I stared at them for a long while before picking them up. Cold metal in my hand. It reminded me of when my mother shoved the house key into my palm and told me not to come back. Somehow, this felt worse. At least back then, I knew they hated me. With Marcus, I wasn't even sure I'd been real to him. The ride out of Houston was long, flat, and quiet. The road stretched like ribbon across farmland, and trees too tall to care who I was. My thoughts tangled as I watched the city disappear in the rear view. The house was waiting, like someone knew I was coming before I did. It was a single-story ranch style, modern but oddly sterile. A place with no past, a place made for watching, not living. Inside, everything was neat, polished counters, staged furniture, and tucked in the living room cabinet, a folder labeled in small block letters, EV. I opened it. Inside were surveillance stills of me, walking in the rain the night of the hospital, exiting Marcus's car, standing at the penthouse window. Notes, times, places. Who had been watching me? Him? Someone else? I closed the folder slowly, my hand flat against the cover like I could smother the truth inside it. Later that evening, while unpacking a box left in the corner, bedroom, I found a small mirror wrapped in linen. I set it on the dresser and stared into it, not to fix my hair, not to check my face, just to look, to remember. I whispered to my reflection, "I'm not yours, not anymore." And for once, I believed it, even if just a little. It was nearly midnight when my phone rang. The name on the screen stopped my breath. Celia. I answered without thinking. "Mom said you're in trouble. Again." Her voice cooed, false warmth wrapped in years of judgment. "Maybe it's time you came home. Let's just forget the drama. You've always been good at that." My spine straightened. "You knew," I said, my voice low. "You knew I was out here." She paused, then softly, "Well, people talk." I hung up. No goodbye, no apology, just silence, the kind I now chose. I spent the next few hours pacing the hall, pausing at windows, doors, corners. Every creak made me turn. Every flicker of light outside made my stomach knot. But I didn't run. Not this time. I stood in front of the mirror again and said out loud, "I'm not someone's secret anymore." The words didn't fix anything, but they lit a match in the dark. Later, when the moon hung low and pale, Headlights swept across the living room. A car rolled slowly into the driveway. My heart stalled, then raced. It wasn't Marcus. A man in a gray suit stepped out. Not hurried, not afraid, confident. Like this was his place, not mine. He held a folder, the same kind I'd found, and then he looked up, right into the window where I stood, and smiled. He didn't knock. He didn't move. He just waited, like someone who already knew I'd open the door. When I finally opened the door, he called me by my childhood nickname, a name I hadn't heard in years. "Hello, Ellie," he said. His voice was calm, low, steady, but it hit me harder than any scream could have. "Marcus said you'd remember me." I froze. Only 2 people ever called me that, my mother and Celia. Hearing it now, in the doorway of a house I hadn't even chosen, made my stomach twist. The man stood there with a faint smile, dressed in a gray suit, too neat for this dusty road. He wasn't young, but not old either. The kind of man who looked like he'd been in control his whole life. The kind who didn't need to raise his voice to remind you that you were already 2 steps behind. "Who are you?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past me into the house, scanning every corner like he'd been here before. "I'm Samuel Dre," he said finally, pulling a card from his pocket and setting it on the table near the door. "I used to work with Marcus." Used to, past tense. "Marcus sent you?" I asked. "In a way." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "He wanted you to understand the situation. You've been under protection, not prison. But protection comes with debts." He said it like a lawyer delivering a verdict. I didn't invite him in, but he stepped across the threshold anyway, moving with the ease of someone who didn't need permission. I followed him into the kitchen. He sat down, unbuttoned his jacket, and slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, recent ones, of my parents and Celia. My father shaking hands with a city councilman. My mother laughing at a charity auction. Celia with her perfect hair, her perfect smile. The logo in the corner of each photo was familiar. The D'Amato Foundation. My throat tightened. "You've been watching them." He nodded, unapologetic. "And you, Marcus never stopped." I stared at him. "Where is he?" "Gone, but not by choice." Samuel leaned forward. "You see, your family and Marcus share more than you think. Years ago, your father moved money through one of Marcus's companies, legitimate on the surface, until it wasn't. When federal agents started digging, Marcus shut everything down. Your father didn't." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "He used you," Samuel continued softly. "He let you take the fall, the pregnancy, the scandal, to keep attention off himself. That's why they turned on you. You weren't the shame, Alaris. You were the secret." My chest tightened, but not from pain this time. Anger spread through me, quiet but clean. I thought back to my father's cold words in that hospital hallway. "You're the shame of this family." How easily he said it. How easily I believed him. I laughed, low and bitter. "So he threw me out to save himself." Samuel didn't deny it. Families do ugly things when they're desperate to stay respectable. I pushed the folder away, unable to look at their faces anymore. "So, what do you want from me?" He folded his hands. "Marcus disappeared 2 weeks ago. Before he did, he told me if anything happened, I should find you. He thought you might be the only one who could reach him, if he's still alive." "Why me?" "Because he trusted you." The words hung between us like smoke. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Marcus, the man who had rescued me, controlled me, and vanished without a word, trusted me? Or was I just another pawn on his board? I looked Samuel dead in the eye. "And if I say no?" He gave a half shrug. "Then you stay here Keep pretending this house is safe, but someone will come for you eventually. Marcus protected you for a reason, Ellie. You might want to find out what it was before they do." His use of Ellie again scraped against something inside me. "I'm not her anymore," I said. "My name is Alaris." He smiled faintly. "Fair enough, but names don't erase the past." The rain had started again, soft at first, tapping against the windows like fingers. The silence stretched until I finally spoke. "I'll help you," I said slowly. "But when I find him, I decide what happens next." Samuel's eyes glinted, amused. "Deal." He extended his hand across the table. I looked at it for a long time but didn't move. "I don't shake hands with ghosts," I said, standing up. Something flickered in his expression, maybe approval, maybe warning. But he didn't push. We drove to a small diner outside the city, the kind of place with chipped mugs and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. I didn't touch my food. Samuel talked in circles about missing files, anonymous threats, coded messages Marcus supposedly left behind. I listened, filing it all away. But one thing he said stuck. Marcus didn't just save you, he saved you from something, or someone. I stared out the rain-speckled window. Then I guess it's time I find out who. He leaned back, satisfied. "Good. Just remember, when you find him, don't ask why he saved you. Ask what he saved you for." Outside, the rain poured harder, washing the parking lot clean. I stepped out first, clutching the thin coat tighter around my shoulders. For once, I didn't feel small beneath the storm. I felt awake. I glanced back through the window one last time. Samuel was watching me, still seated, still smiling, that calm, knowing smile. He raised his coffee cup in a silent toast, as if to say, "Game on." That night, I started my own investigation. One that would lead straight back to the people who had called me a disgrace. The first name I searched wasn't Marcus D'Amato. It was my sister, Celia. Rain tapped against the window of the small office I'd rented downtown. The same steady rhythm it always had when I was a kid, trying not to cry. The screen's glow lit up the dim space as I typed her married name, Celia Vance. And there she was, smiling in a crimson dress, holding hands with a city official. Philanthropist Celia Vance to chair annual Houston Charity Ball, sponsored by the D'Amato Foundation. My stomach knotted. I reread the headline twice, 3 times. Marcus's name, the foundation, the city's elite, all neatly connected to my sister. Her smile was exactly as I remembered. Polished, generous, disarming. The world called it kindness. I knew better. I stared at the photo until the background faded and only her face remained. Frozen, perfect, untouchable. And in that moment, a memory surfaced. I was 8. Celia was 10. We were standing in the hallway of our childhood home, a broken vase between us. One of our father's favorites. The kind he said came from the old country, even though we both knew he'd picked it up at an estate sale. "I didn't mean to," Celia whispered, wide-eyed. "But you're better at crying. He forgives you faster." I took the blame, got grounded, missed my class trip. She got a new dress. And that pattern repeated, over and over, through teenage years and early adulthood. Until eventually the stakes became more than broken vases and school dances. Until eventually it was me alone in a hospital room and her on a stage. I closed the browser and leaned back in the chair, staring up at the ceiling as the weight of it pressed down. I wasn't looking at a sister anymore. I was looking at an architect, one who had quietly, methodically, built a future on the ashes of mine. I picked up my phone, hesitated, then used a secure number Samuel had given me. A burner. One of Marcus's former accountants, a man named Nolan, who owed Marcus more than a few favors, answered on the 3rd ring. "I need to know about Celia Vance," I said flatly. Silence. Then, Alaris, you should walk away from this. Too late. After a pause, he spoke again, voice hushed. Marcus didn't disappear. He was told to. He sent a file, encrypted. I decrypted it and opened it slowly, already knowing what I would find. There it was. A bank transfer, meeting logs, timestamps. 2 weeks before Marcus vanished, Celia had met with him privately. And right after that meeting, a large donation went to a nonprofit specializing in digital data scrubbing, the kind that erases criminal records, medical history, birth certificates. Mine. She didn't protect me. She silenced me. I stared at the document until my eyes burned. Then I called her. It rang 3 times before she answered. Ellie, she said. That name again. That syrupy tone, like nothing had ever happened. I was going to call you. Don't lie, I said, calm but sharp. You never call unless you're afraid of something. A pause, then. You don't understand what you're stirring up. Dad had to make choices. We all did. And you chose to disappear me? I said, quieter now. To clean me off the family record like a stain on your dress? Her breath caught. It wasn't like that. It's always like that with you. You smile while you burn the floor beneath me. You think you're the only one who's been hurt? She said suddenly, her voice rising. You think hiding in a corner and playing victim gives you the right to destroy what's left of this family? I closed my eyes, and for the first time I didn't cry. You're not my sister anymore, I said softly. You're my reminder. I ended the call. The office felt smaller now, but also sharper, like the air had cleared and every corner had come into focus. I gathered my things, grabbed the thin coat from the back of the chair, and drove home in silence. At the house, I moved through each room like I was shedding old skin. I pulled out the coat, still clean, still light, and hung it on a mannequin I used for sewing practice, placing it by the window where the city lights poured through. I wanted it to see what freedom looked like, I whispered, as if it could hear me. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body felt calm, but my mind was restless, not with panic, but with the strange stillness that follows a deep cut, when something has been severed and there's no more guessing, just blood and truth. Around 2 a.m., the security system flickered. I sat up. On the monitor, the camera at the front gate went from static to clear. There she was, Celia, standing soaked in the rain, holding an envelope like a peace offering. Her hair was plastered to her face. She didn't look polished, she looked human. And maybe that was the most dangerous thing of all. She hadn't rung the bell, she just stood there, waiting, like she always had someone else to do the explaining for her. But I already knew. Explanations were just new versions of the same lie. I didn't invite her in. I wanted her to stand in the rain, just long enough to feel what I felt that night. Celia stood at the gate, soaked from head to toe. Her designer coat, probably worth more than my car, clung to her frame like a soaked paper bag. Her makeup had surrendered to the downpour, running down her cheeks in quiet streaks. She wasn't crying, not yet, but the envelope in her hand trembled. You came a long way, I said, staying under the covered porch, arms crossed. What do you want? She looked at me with that rehearsed sadness, the one she used on Dad, on the media, on husbands past and present. Ellie, I brought something you need to see. I didn't move. I didn't blink. She stepped forward, holding the envelope out like it contained forgiveness. Please, she said, her voice quieter now. Just hear me out. After a long moment, I opened the door and let her into the foyer, not out of kindness, but curiosity. Inside, I turned on one lamp. The rest of the loft remained dim, shadows playing on the walls like memories. The storm outside added its own percussion, steady and unrelenting. Celia placed the envelope on my kitchen counter and opened it slowly. Inside, thick stacks of cash, fake deeds, altered contracts with my name stamped across them. Neatly organized lies. "All of this could be yours," she said, eyes darting between me and the papers. "Forget Marcus. Forget Dad. We can fix everything quietly. Start over." I didn't touch a thing. I didn't have to. Her desperation was louder than thunder. "So this is what you came with?" I said. "A bribe wrapped in rainwater." "It's not a bribe," she replied quickly. "It's a way out. You don't have to burn everything down." I stepped back, laughing once. Low and dry. "You think this fixes what you did? What you let happen? You think silence can be bought with dead money?" "You're being dramatic." "No," I said sharply. "I'm being clear." I turned away, walked to the living room, and sat in the chair nearest the window. The thin coat hung nearby on its mannequin, facing outward. It didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like part of the room, a witness. Celia followed, quieter now, almost reverent. She glanced at the coat, then back to me. "Ellie, we were scared. You don't know everything." I looked out the window, not meeting her eyes. "I know enough." And then my phone buzzed. A secure message. The contact name was one I hadn't seen in days. M. I opened it without a word. "The contracts she's showing you are forged. I've held the originals, your inheritance, the foundation, all of it. Your father tried to erase you. I didn't let him." My chest tightened. The storm outside didn't feel loud enough for the storm inside me. I set the phone down, letting the message hang in the air like smoke. Celia watched me carefully. "You okay?" I turned to face her, finally. "You think I'm still that girl you left behind, but I've been rebuilding from scraps. I've read every line of the truth while you kept polishing the lie." Her face hardened, the act slipping for a moment. "You don't want this fight," she said. I stood, slowly, calmly. "You're right, I want the truth. But I'm not afraid of the fight anymore." She opened her mouth, then closed it. The envelope of dirty salvation still sat between us. "I'm not just surviving anymore," I added. "I'm reclaiming what's mine, on my terms." I didn't need her reply. She left without another word, heels echoing on the wet pavement as she disappeared into the storm. Later that night, I sat in the loft's silence and opened a clean envelope of my own. Inside, the documents Marcus had mentioned, the originals, deeds, statements, names, the map of every lie my family built their empire on. It was all there. I slipped them into a new folder, labeled it simply Reunion. I stood, walked to the mannequin, and adjusted the coat slightly. The wind from the open window caught its edge, lifting it like it was about to fly. It wouldn't protect me anymore, but it could still stand, like I had. I zipped the folder into my travel case, locked it, and slid it beneath my desk. Tomorrow, I would walk into that reunion not as a daughter, not as a disgrace, but as the only one who hadn't lied to survive. The storm outside roared louder, but for once, I felt steady. And in that steadiness, I found purpose. The morning of the reunion came with a strange hush, not peace, just silence. The kind that settles before a storm when the air is too still, too thick. I zipped up the envelope, double-checked the contents, and slid it into my handbag. By sunset, the Houston Country Club shimmered like a gilded memory I didn't want. Rows of cars, valets, laughter muffled behind champagne flutes. Inside, the grand ballroom pulsed with small talk and old money. When I stepped into the hall, the music didn't stop, but the room did. Heads turned, eyebrows raised. My father froze mid-toast, crystal glass in hand. My mother blinked twice, as if seeing a ghost. Celia's wine glass trembled just slightly before she caught it. I didn't wear red or anything dramatic, just black, clean, tailored, sharp, simple enough to look respectful, strong enough to make them uneasy. I wasn't invited, I said, stepping fully into the light. But then again, I never was. No one moved. The string quartet stopped mid-measure. I crossed the floor with steady heels and took the podium before anyone had the sense to stop me. My fingers didn't shake, not this time. I was told family was everything, I began. That loyalty came before truth. That silence was love. I paused, letting their discomfort settle like dust. 3 years ago, I left this family with nothing but a coat. Tonight, I return it. I lifted the envelope instead, and the lies that came with it. I signaled the technician, a young man I'd hired myself, and the ballroom's projection screens flickered on. Bank transfers, forged deeds, fraudulent charities, and names. My father's name, my mother's, Celia's, all perfectly displayed beneath timestamps and offshore routing numbers. The room gasped in waves. Someone dropped a fork. A few people turned away, as if distance might dilute the truth. My father's face went pale. He took a step toward me. "This is slander." "No," I said evenly. "It's inheritance. You built it on lies, and I'm just returning the favor." Celia stood rooted, tears on her cheeks. Not sorrow, exposure. Her face crumpled under the weight of a crumbling image. My mother reached out to me, trembling. "Ellie, please," she whispered. "Let's talk." I looked at her hand, that familiar grasp I'd spent a lifetime reaching for. Then I stepped back. "You talked when you threw me out," I said. "I'm done listening." Behind the chaos, the ballroom doors opened again, and he was there, Marcus, alive. Standing tall in the back, older than I remembered but no less sure. His eyes met mine, calm and unflinching. He didn't speak to the room, just to me. "I promised I'd watch over you," he said softly. "You did the rest yourself." No applause followed, just silence, respectful, terrified. The foundation of their perfect little empire was cracking, and I was the one who held the crowbar. I walked off the stage without looking back. Outside, the night was damp. Not raining yet, but close. The air smelled like wet concrete and blooming magnolias. Marcus followed, but didn't crowd me. He stopped a few feet behind, just enough to give space, not distance. "You've won," he said. I turned to face him, exhaling slowly. "No, I've stopped losing." He nodded once. No pride, no regret. Just understanding. Near the front bench, I pulled the thin coat from my bag, the one I'd clung to like armor through every exile. I draped it over the wooden backrest, letting the wind lift its edges gently. "It's not mine anymore," I said. "It belongs to the girl who needed saving." Marcus stayed quiet, then took a step back. No promises, no goodbyes. He turned and disappeared into the night like he always had. Quietly, completely. Inside, I heard the murmurs of reporters flooding in, cameras flashing as reputations unraveled. I didn't care. I looked up at the sky. A few drops of rain tapped my forehead, warm and soft. The storm had passed, but I knew healing would take longer than justice ever did. 3 months later, I stood before a crowd again. This time, not at a reunion, not at a courtroom or funeral, but under the warm Texas sun in the heart of Houston. The youth shelter's ribbon fluttered in the breeze beside me. A modest plaque gleamed behind, the Haven, in memory of those left behind for those still standing. This time, I wasn't standing as someone trying to prove anything. I was simply me. I cleared my throat and glanced over the gathering. Teens, social workers, volunteers. Not a spotlight in sight. No photographers chasing headlines. Just faces that needed hope. "If someone ever tells you you're nothing," I said, "remember, that's only because they see something they can't control." The applause was soft, respectful, genuine. I stepped away from the podium, my heart not pounding, not racing, just beating steady. After the event, I walked alone to the edge of the lot where the kids were planting wildflowers. Someone handed me a small shovel, but I just knelt down beside them, pressed my palm to the soil, and stayed there a while. Later that evening, I drove out to a quiet hilltop cemetery in the outskirts. The grass was still damp from morning rain. I carried a single white rose. Marcus had passed the month before, peacefully, the way he deserved. The doctor said it was natural, but something in me knew he'd let go on his own terms. He'd left behind more than his estate. I found a letter in his handwriting, tucked between the pages of his old leather-bound planner. You were never my project. You were my proof that people can choose to rebuild without becoming what broke them. I read it again before laying the rose gently on his grave. You taught me power isn't dominance, I whispered. It's silence that doesn't need permission. The sun had dipped low by the time I stood up. No dramatics, just stillness, just gratitude. Back in the city, news of my family's unraveling had already faded from front pages. My father's trial rolled on without fanfare. He sat through it with his jaw clenched and his tie too tight, still trying to command rooms that no longer listened. Mom stayed silent, claiming illness. Celia negotiated a plea. The kind money buys when the damage is too big to sweep under a rug. I didn't attend any of it. I didn't need to. Instead, I read about it in the paper over morning coffee one Saturday, then folded the pages neatly and dropped them into the recycling bin. They were still chasing forgiveness from people who never meant to forgive. Letting go wasn't a gesture of sainthood, it was self-preservation. My new apartment sat on the 5th floor of a quiet building off Montrose Boulevard. I had no doorman, no wine fridge, just sunlight on my bookshelves and the gentle hum of the city below. There were no trophies here, just coffee mugs, paperbacks, a bulletin board of shelter updates, and a framed picture of me and Marcus, the only photo we ever took together. It had been snapped by a diner waitress who said we looked like troublemakers. We were. One morning, just before dawn, I stepped out onto the balcony barefoot. The city was still half asleep. A few buses rumbled in the distance. A jogger passed below. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. I didn't feel heavy. I didn't feel hollow either. I leaned against the railing and whispered to myself, I used to think strength meant winning. Now I think it means staying open, even after losing. That afternoon, I took a walk through the park not far from my old loft. The air was cooler now. Fall was teasing its arrival. As I passed the same bench outside the ballroom, the one where I'd left that thin coat all those months ago, I slowed. There, curled up on the wooden slats, was a young girl, barely a teen, face half buried in her knees, and draped over her shoulders. That coat, still thin, still worn, but covering someone who needed it. I didn't say anything, didn't walk over. I just smiled and kept going. Maybe that's what healing looks like, passing warmth forward. By nightfall, I was back home, standing at the window, watching the lights blink on across the city. I didn't need music, didn't want noise, just quiet. And as the sky turned a deep velvet blue, I sat on the floor with a cup of tea and thought about all the names they'd called me. Shame, disgrace, disappointment. None of them fit anymore. They called me shame. I became strength. They left me with nothing, and somehow I made peace out of it. I'm not the girl they abandoned. I'm the woman I became.